Hello to those of you tuning in the future. Hello from the past. So we are here today to talk about yoga myths and yoga in general, and things that I've learned that I wish I knew when I got started with yoga. And part of the reason I'm doing this is because these are things that people always ask me about, and I did include them, shameless plug, in my new book, which has just launched and I'm promoting right now. And so I made a list of both the myths and the lessons, some of which are in the book and some of which aren't. But maybe you're seeing this as part of a series of videos or live events that I'm doing to promote the book, and I'm pulling things out from the book to give people an idea of what's inside. Because one of the myths is that you have to know so much, and really you don't have to know a lot to get started. So just to kind of back up before I really dig in, just a little introduction of who am I, in case you're not sure and you just stumbled upon this. My name is Laura Burns, and I am a yoga teacher. I live in Houston, Texas. I am a fat person. I've been fat my whole life. I have chronic illness. I have always been very active in different ways. I was in dance, I was in soccer when I was younger, but I've always been fat. And so being the fattest person on the team or in the space in exercise or movement spaces is very familiar to me. And I know how it feels to be that person and not have a lot of support. So I'm very excited to talk to you today about all these things and to have been able to compile information and instruction in the book. And so, yeah, let's get started. And then if you're here live, if you have any, myths or ideas about yoga or getting started that you specifically wanted to bring up, I would love to hear that. You can type it in the chat, or you can come off of mute and say it at any time, and I will totally respond to that. And then if you're watching this later, I'm not sure where it's going to end up, maybe YouTube or maybe on my website. But if there's a space for you to comment, totally comment, because I will see those comments eventually and be able to respond to you. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm at Radical Body Love, and you are so welcome to comment and message me there. Okay, so I'm going to dig in with the things that I pulled. So I will start with one that is not in the book, but it is very commonly asked, but it does go hand in hand with one that is in the book where, what does it say exactly? It says, myth, I can't try yoga until I lose weight. And this is a really common thing that fat people have kind of beaten into them, is that their bodies are not for the things that they want, right? And so they can't really do those things until they change themselves. And I definitely used to believe that also, oh, I can't do this until I lose weight, or I can't wear this until I lose weight, or even having specific numbers, until I hit this number, I can't do this. And which is bullshit, right? We know. In very few circumstances, there may be a gear limitation or something, but in most circumstances, it's not true. But it's something that we're taught as a means of marginalizing us more. And so the flip side to that is the one that I get that people say to me all the time, which is, I'm not flexible enough to try yoga. And there's a lot of things that come into my mind when I hear that, but what comes into my mind first is yoga is where you can gain flexibility. Very few people come to yoga already super flexible, and it seems unreasonable to ask that of people to already be really flexible when they come into yoga. The problem is what we see represented as yoga are images, video, or photo of people who are very flexible doing yoga. And so you think oh, I have to be like that in order to do it, which is really harmful and very I don't know, almost gatekeeping, I think. And so here's what I have to say. You don't already have to be flexible to try yoga. In fact, especially for fat folks, and I would say in some cases like disabled folks or older people, like the functional flexibility that you can gain can really improve your quality of life. So for example, I've talked to a lot of people who maybe had been in smaller bodies and then got fatter and suddenly had trouble like doing some of their everyday tasks that used to be like easy no-brainers for them. And now it was like, oh, this is kind of a challenge. The cool thing about yoga and flexibility training and mobility training in general is that you can target certain things if you want. You can work on flexibility in a certain area that will then make those tasks easier for you in the long run. And that's something that people don't talk about a lot, right? Like when we see yoga represented, it's always about like looking a certain way or like achieving these like very dramatic, I call them glamour poses, like, you know, the like skinny white lady, like holding her leg up behind her on the edge of a cliff, like with her eyes closed, is like always the thing that I think of. But we don't think about like, hey, you know, like my yoga practice could help me find more mobility and make it easier for me to get off the couch. Can make it easier for me to sit on the floor and also be able to get back up again. Can make it easier for me to bathe myself or whatever it is, to make the bed, to do all these things that are like functional parts of your life. And so I hear so often, I'm not flexible enough. But this is where you can gain that. And there's no like flexibility prerequisite for trying yoga. And I understand the fear behind it. Like, what if I get into class and like, I can't do the thing, right? A teacher who knows how to work with your body will have options for you. And that's, so like, that's what I try to bring to all of my classes is options. And it's been complicated by online teaching because you can't always see everything or people don't even have their video on. But in general, like if you know a fat body and how to work with them, you can offer options even without seeing the person. And so one of the things I try to do in the book is to add in lots of options so that if you're at home, like trying something out, which can be very, putting yourself in a vulnerable place to try something new. And so having lots of options like, oh, if it feels like this, try this, or, oh, if this is happening, try this, just to it helps to take some of the fear out of it. So yeah, so not flexible enough, that's fine. You can gain flexibility. And also some people are very naturally flexible and some people aren't. And honestly, like if you are not a naturally flexible person, unless you really focus on that and work on it a lot, like you're never going to become that flexible person, but you can find the things that are important to you flexibility wise and work on those, like with the functional flexibility and mobility that I was talking about. So that's the first one that I had written down because people say that to me so often, and I get it. So I wanted to be sure and have that one in there. And I do talk about flexibility in the book, but it's not like literally named in one of the myths that I have in there. But the next two are. And so the one after that is I have to go hard and push. Well, what's the full? I didn't write down the full thing. I have to go hard, sweat, and really push myself. This is something that because of our culture, the like competitive, like honestly, I think this is like a product of like capitalism and white supremacy. This idea that we have to be pushing ourselves all the time, that we have to always be like going hard. And then in the Western world, we have adapted yoga to be fitness. And like hot take, yoga isn't fitness. But it has become that in our country. I'll speak for the US at least. And so you see these representations of yoga and it's people dripping with sweat and these glamour poses that are very challenging. Everything is a handstand and a leg up and a balance and a dripping sweat kind of thing. And that's what is held up as like yoga. and it's aspirational. And this is what we should all be wanting to do. I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to do literally any of those things. I don't want to drip with sweat on a yoga mat. I don't want to like balance on the edge of a cliff. I don't want to do a handstand. Like, I don't care about any of that. My yoga practice is not about those things. And for some people it is. I'm like, that's fine. If that's your goal, that's cool. I'm probably not the teacher for you. My yoga practice is about being in my body and healing and learning about myself and resting and finding connection and peace and ease. Like, that's what my yoga is about. And so this like myth, this narrative of like having to push yourself all the time and everything has to be sweaty and you have to like, you know, find your edge and try to go past it. Like, no, not necessarily. I mean, if that is what gets you going and you love it, sure, fine. But the idea that like to practice yoga, you have to do it like that is really harmful, I think, because it tells all the people for whom that's not the vibe that they're wrong, that they should want that. I used to think that I was supposed to want that. And I would try to be that person and try to be like that. And I hurt myself. That's what happened, is I literally hurt myself by pushing more than my body really could handle. I made myself sick. It was just bad. It was all around bad. And so I hear from people like, oh, you know, how many calories can I burn in this class? Or like, you know, how quickly could I progress, you know, to this like ultimate version of the pose, as if there's something wrong with doing it any other way than like full out gymnastic style. And I think that it stops people from even trying it. Because if I can't ever be that, why should I do this at all? Or if that's not even my goal, then maybe this isn't even the thing for me, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I, in my personal practice, sometimes I'm just feeling like very energetic and I go a little harder than normal. But like for the most part, I have allowed myself to just accept that my yoga goals are not any of those things. And that has been like the greatest move for me, is to just say, you know what, I could have the most chill yoga practice for the rest of my life and it could be amazing. And I think that that's something that doesn't get put out there that often. The message is usually like, oh, well, you can start here, but eventually you could be there, you could be doing that. And like I said, cool, if that's really what you want, that's fine. But I think a lot of people don't really want that. They just feel like that's what they should be working towards, instead of just allowing themselves to have like a very chill practice and still moving and stretching and doing all the whatever, but not needing to be aiming for anything more than that. I say very often, like with various ends of the statement, but like, or maybe beginnings of the statement, but that like you could do X, Y, and Z for the rest of your life and have a rich, rewarding, wonderful yoga practice. So I guess it's the beginning of the statement. And so here it is. You could have a chill, gentle, restorative, or, you know, slow movement, gentle yoga practice for the rest of your life, and it would be rich and rewarding and valid, is what I have to say. Because so much of what gets put out there is like, it's not valid if it's not like going super hard. Okay, so then the next myth, and this is the last one I have on my list because I have a lot of like things I've learned, which I really want to get to and have time for. But I need, well, let me read you the actual thing that it says instead of my like 3-word version. Myth number 4, I need all new equipment and every kind of prop before I can start. Okay, I don't know about you, but I am definitely the person that's like, oh, I want to get into this new hobby. I have to get all the things for it. And then you get into the hobby and you're like, oh, I don't know if I liked this as much as I thought I was going to. And then you have all this stuff. Or like, you know, I want to go in on this new style. And instead of like slowly changing your clothing or your house or whatever, you just like get a bunch of stuff and spend a bunch of money, and then you're like, well, maybe you do like it, but you just like put yourself in a bad situation because you spent too much money at one time for whatever reason. People feel like that about yoga. Like, I can't do it unless I see the fancy yoga mat, the, you know, all these blocks and this bolster and these kind of specific yoga blankets and towels and like all of this stuff. And that stuff is expensive. They have done a really, they have done a really good job of creating products for yoga. And not that I hate all these products, I like a lot of them, but I think of most like yoga gear and equipment as like nice but not necessary. There's only a couple things that I think are like, yes, have this to get started, but they don't have to be fancy. And in fact, one of the other events that I want to do this fall, which if you're watching from the future, then it's already out, you can find the recording, is a DIY props workshop, because I DIY props all the time and people are like, oh, how do you do that? So I want to show how you can do it. And so what I would say is like, you don't have to have all the things to get started. And that's also like a good stalling technique. Like, oh, well, when I have this, then I'll go ahead and, you know, try it out. I'll finally like watch that class that I bought, you know, on DVD. I don't know if people buy DVDs anymore. Or like that streaming service that I'm paying for, like I'll finally do it once I have these props, but I don't have those props yet, so I can't do it. And what I would say to that is you don't need it. Honestly, if you don't have a yoga mat, just find a surface that's not slippery if you're going to be doing movement, or that is like not like super hard if you're just going to be like sitting and stretching or laying down. For most people new to yoga, unless you're doing like that super intense, very athletic fitness style, like power yoga, like you could get away with not having a mat. And then once you know that you actually like it and you want to do it, you could buy a mat, or you can buy like super cheap mats now. They have them for like $10 that I see all the time at like a TJ Maxx or like Target or Walmart, garage sales, because people buy yoga mats and then realize that they're not a yoga person. So they sell them super cheap at garage sales. And I've seen some nice mats at garage sales, actually, like $100 yoga mats for like $10. So, but yeah, so if you don't have a yoga mat, that's fine. Non-slip is really what you care about. And if you're doing like restorative or like seated and reclined only, then like your rug, your carpet would be fine. You just don't want something under you that's going to literally move. So like a blanket on a wood or tile floor, right? It's going to slip around. Other than that, like you're probably fine, especially as you're just figuring out whether you like it. And then the other things that I would tell you are blocks and a strap. If you had a limited amount of money to work with and you were going to buy props, I would tell you to get blocks and a strap before you get a mat, because I think that they're more useful. However, you don't have to buy that at all. And we'll talk more about it when I have that event, but you can totally DIY or have household swaps for blocks and a strap. For blocks, you can use literally like a thick book or two that you wrap in paper like a present and then put duct tape around it for stability. If you have any of those big cans, like the number 10 cans, if that means anything to you, they're like big cans. They're very sturdy. You can put a lot of weight on them. If the blocks that if you're using blocks to like bring the floor up or like hold some weight, those are really great. They're not super comfortable, but they do the job. Anything that you can like firmly stack together to create like the size and shape of a block and then like wrap it in duct tape, it'll work. I've made many a DIY block out of random stuff. You can make your own out of cardboard. There's so many things you can do. And for a strap, if you have any long piece of something that's not stretchy that you can easily hold in your hand, it's great. It'll work. So like if you have like neckties, they're well, you can't see, but they're probably like maybe this long. Here's my hand over here. When you lay them out, like 2 or 3 neckties strung together will work. Um, a dog leash, if you have a nice long dog leash, if it's the not the retractable kind, those are great. Those are excellent straps. And also, if you want to buy a strap, you can get it for $5 on Amazon, maybe $8 to $10 at like a Target or a sporting goods store. Straps are pretty available now. And also, there are so many like free, guaranteed, you could look around your house and find something to work as a yoga strap. So you don't have to spend, yoga doesn't have to cost money. That would be another myth. Yoga does not have to cost a lot of money. And you don't have to have all the things. And if you decide, hey, I'm really liking this, I'd like to invest in, some like actually made for yoga strap or blocks or whatever, great. But don't let not having those things keep you from trying it. And also, there's a lot you can do without any of those things. It just makes it a little more accessible for a lot of things to have at least one block and a strap. Okay, so those are the myths that I wanted to cover today. I mean, obviously there are a ton more myths, and I could spend, I don't know, all day talking about them, but I want to move on to stuff that I've learned, because I think that this is like the most helpful kind of things. Like, this is all stuff that I wish that I knew when I tried yoga. And so just briefly, I'm going to tell you about when I tried yoga for the first time. Spoiler alert, it was terrible. So when I was in high school, so this would have been the late 90s, my friends who were not fat were going to hot yoga class, and they loved it. And they would tell me, oh my God, I come out of class and I feel like I'm floating on a cloud. I just feel so amazing, and it's like so great, and my body feels good. And back then I was firmly entrenched in in diet culture, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I could, whatever. And then like really feeding into diet culture and the like idea of the yoga body and all this stuff. It was gross. I don't recommend that way of thinking about your body and about yoga. But back then I did. And so I decided to try it, and it was awful. It was really bad. I went to this hot yoga class, and if you don't know anything about hot yoga, it's a bunch of people in a room with the heat cranked up to like 100 degrees or something. I don't know, really, really hot. It's like being in a sauna. Plus, I don't know if they still do this now, but back then the rooms were carpeted. And so you've got very sweaty people, like 30 people sweating in a room 5 times a day, just getting their sweat in the carpet, right? Oh, it's so gross to me. Why carpeted? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, but like carpeted rooms, super hot, people just sweating, people not wearing a lot of clothes. And the style of hot yoga came from a teacher who's like super fat phobic and very diet culture, and would say gross things about people's bodies, and like, tell them you need to cut this out and you need to do this and you're gross and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I didn't know any of that. I went to this class. It was so hot. I thought I was going to die. I couldn't make my body do the things that other people were doing. And the teacher did not attempt to help me at all. And when they did, it was mostly just like a, what do they call it? Tough love. Oh my God. It was awful. It was like very traumatizing to a young Laura Burns who was really self-conscious about her body and didn't know how to advocate for herself in that moment. And so I thought, oh, well, that was just bad class. So I tried another one. I tried a bunch of different classes. They were all awful. I left each one crying, feeling really internalizing shame and fat phobia and just ableism, like all the things. Like, it was awful. It was like the worst case scenario, worst way to try it. And I didn't know that there could be something better. So I just decided yoga wasn't for me, didn't try it again for a long time. And I'm so long-winded and rambly, so I'm trying to keep this short. Basically, fast forward, I found Heavyweight Yoga by Abby Lentz much later, after already having like just, stopped dieting and found body positivity and fat liberation and stuff. And I found Abby Lentz, who's a yoga teacher, and Heavyweight Yoga, which is the like brand of yoga that she created, and it changed my life. And for the first time, I saw fat bodies, fatter than me, practicing yoga, looking strong and badass and happy and like comfortable in their own bodies. And I was like, oh, I want this. This is what I want. Like, this is what I've been looking for. And so that was like my gateway back to yoga. And along the way, like then I tried to do classes again, and it was like kind of the same thing as it had been like over a decade before. Like the yoga industry had not changed. And so here's where we get into, here are lessons that I have learned, having tried it, hated it, tried it, loved it, become a yoga teacher, and still does not feel comfortable just like going to any studio to pick up a class. So the first lesson is the yoga industry is really behind the times. They are still stuck in that old fat phobic, diet culture-y, push, competitive perspective of yoga. And therefore, it's not really safe, I don't think. And I don't recommend to people that they just walk into a studio and try a class. And some people will disagree with that and say it's fine. I have not found it to be safe to just like randomly pop into a studio and try to take a class, because I have done it and they don't know what to do with my body. And there's more to it than that, but that's a whole other 30-minute conversation. But basically, yoga, the way that it works is that yoga studios, it's hard to make money as a yoga studio. So you start doing yoga teacher trainings, and the more people you can get into your trainings, the more money you can make. That's really how they stay in business. And they pump out yoga teachers. They just produce them like crazy, and then they get them to teach their classes for free. They build it in as like your what do they call it? Oh, I forgot what they call it. But basically it's like sweat equity, or almost like an apprenticeship, except you're not actually getting like the mentorship that comes along with a real apprenticeship. So basically they pump out these new yoga teachers, and they don't teach them much at all, if anything, about how to work with bodies who are not just like the standard thin, able-bodied, young-ish person. And so then you have the classes at these studios taught by people with like almost no experience and no specific training in working with any kind of body different than probably theirs. And so then you have a person walking in who has a different kind of body, and that teacher does not know what to do with them. And so one of two things usually happens. They ignore them because they have no idea what to do with them, or they over highlight them. And I've experienced that both of these, they over highlight them because they want them to, they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. And they're a nice person. They really do, like, they're glad they're here. I want you to have a good class. I don't really know what to do with your body, so I'm just going to praise you. And class, look at how Laura is doing that, like making everyone look, it's like, oh my God, it's the worst. Over highlighting or ignoring. There's like very often no middle ground because they just don't know. They're it's like a bless your heart, like you don't know any better. But that's really potentially harmful for people who are walking in, who don't know, who think I'm going to walk into a class and the teacher's going to know how to teach my body. So that's one of the biggest lessons, is like, you can't, the yoga industry is behind the times. Teacher trainings are not teaching them the things that they need to work with all kinds of bodies. And there's no continued support after that to help them learn that once they start teaching. And so unless somebody specifically seeks out either a training that has that stuff built in or seeks out continuing education, they just don't know. And maybe over, you know, teaching for 10 years, like they'll kind of learn some stuff, but they haven't really gotten that training. And so what you're doing is asking people to come to their class in different kinds of bodies, is you're asking them to risk like potential trauma or injury, or like physical or emotional injury. And I'm not comfortable putting people in that position. And so I like pretty much never recommend specific classes or whatever. I have information about how to find a yoga teacher or a yoga studio. And so I'll be sending an email out to everyone who registered for this. And if you're watching this in the future and you're not on that list because you're in the future, if you comment or send me an email, or maybe I'll make it available, but if you don't see a way to get this handout that I'm about to talk about, then let me know and I'm happy to give it to you. But it's a how to find a teacher or studio handout. So I will include it in the email to everyone who registered for this, if you are registered in 2021 September. And so yeah, behind the times, just know going in that if you are in a body that is strays far at all from thin, able-bodied, youngish, like they probably won't know what to do with you. The good thing is that there have sprung up now many more yoga teachers in those kind of different bodies, which is great because now we have more people teaching and able to be a good, safe teacher for other people. Okay, here's a huge one. This one is really, really important. Yoga is not all about the physical postures. Huge, huge lesson learned. It took me a long time to get there. And even after I realized that and like really took it in, I still find more nuance to this all the time. So you may, and I did, think that yoga was all about the physical postures because that's what we see represented. Marketing companies and brands use yoga to sell us literally everything. I've seen it all. I've seen yoga used to sell yogurt and cars, to sell tools, literally tools and a tool belt. I mean, clothes, obviously, makeup, they will use yoga to sell you anything. And the way that they use it is to show people doing these physical postures. When you read about yoga, it's pictures of people in these postures, right? Because it's easy. It's easy to represent yoga by physical postures. And it's easy to take this one piece of the whole tree of yoga, which has 8 limbs, and the asana or postures is one of those limbs. It's easier to just take that and package it up and sell it to us than to sell us the whole thing or to include the whole thing, because a lot of yoga is about not consuming so much and about not needing, let me not get too bogged down in the specifics, but my brain was like, oh, talk about the yamas and the niyamas and all the things. Let's keep it a little more surface. But basically, a lot of yoga talks about like not needing to have so much to own, to hoard, to consume, and is more about the way that we connect with others and ourselves, the way that we cultivate community, like all of those things that are not commodifiable, right, in the way that the physical postures are. And I mean, like awareness, like as a yoga teacher, I sell classes, I sell instruction in physical postures. So Like people always like to point out, well, you're a yoga teacher. And I'm like, I do. I wish that yoga was free. Yoga should be free, but we live within capitalism and I have bills to pay. And so if I want to do this as my life's work, then I have to charge money for it. And I find ways to create accessibility, but we're in the system that we're in. And so yoga is not all about the physical postures. Coming back to that statement from before, you could have, your practice could have no physical postures and for the rest of your life have that, you know, like all the other stuff about yoga and have a rich and wonderful yoga practice. You don't have that. Maybe that should be a myth. You don't have to do the physical postures at all. Ta-da! Asana, the physical postures, is one limb on the tree of yoga. There are 8 limbs. There are 7 other limbs to yoga that you rarely hear about. In the US, in Western yoga, we're so hyper focused on the physical, and the rest of it is just like kind of some mystical, spiritual, like exotic, you know, stuff that we mention sometimes. And it is worth learning about that other stuff. Even when I started teacher training for yoga, you know, obviously I knew about the other limbs and I, you know, the breath work and the meditation I was into, but the rest of it, I was like, I don't know, I'll learn it, but I don't know how much I'm gonna, you know, use that in my work. That is the most important stuff. In terms of really changing my life and the way that I am as a person, the way that I relate to my body, the way that I exist in my body and interact with other people, the other stuff is so much more important. The physical is nice. It has helped me find mobility and flexibility and strength and all that stuff. It's great. However, I could never do any of that for the rest of my life and be so fulfilled with my yoga practice. And that is something that they don't talk to you about. If you are interested in learning more about that, I can totally, maybe I'll put in that email that I'm going to send out like some books that I've found really helpful. It can be intimidating to get started learning about all the rest of yoga, like genuinely intimidating. So maybe book recommendations would help. So yeah, if yoga is not all about the physical postures, then what is it about? It's all the other stuff. The true healing and transformation that has happened for me has happened because of the work that I've done trying to understand and implement all those other pieces. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over. It's really true, but it's also hard to learn about all the other stuff, but it's worth it. I always say that I have this like equation and it's yoga plus body liberation equals healing. And that has been true for me like so much. I mean, I almost like was not alive anymore. And this is what saved my life, yoga and body liberation and the healing that came from that. And I can tell you that the physical postures were like, they're not even really a part of that equation. To me, the physical postures are like icing on the top. So if that resonates with you, or like, if you're like, oh, I want that, like, it's worth the work to learn about. Okay, and then here's another lesson. And this is the last one that I actually have like written down. It's like, I definitely want to mention this. And this is huge. I say that about all of them. They're all huge. They're all so important. I hope that you really hear me when I say this. Props, yoga props, block, strap, bolster, chair, wall, desk, kitchen counter, any yoga prop, despite the way that Western yoga would teach this or what they would say, yoga props are not for you to use until you don't need them anymore. Our culture of competition and pushing ourselves and going hard and all that stuff teaches us that we use a prop if we need it or if we can't do something, and then we use it until we don't have to use it anymore, until we don't need it anymore. And then we go as unsupported as possible, which is a really harsh and mean way to think about this. And also, it's doing yourself a disservice because props are just a tool and they help us get support, stability. They might help us stay longer in a posture. They might help us like go deeper into it if we want, but they're also just a tool to help us experience a pose differently. I think that the most able-bodied, fit, bendy, strong person in the world, right? Whatever the pinnacle that people would say of like fitness and ability is, they could be served. They could have their experience improved by using props. Sometimes, all the time, doesn't matter. But the philosophy that people have about props is that they're like, well, if you can't do it, then use this prop and you'll get stronger and then you won't have to use it. And I used to think that too. And I have realized over time, lessons learned, that props are amazing and wonderful and so cool. And actually you can find more challenge sometimes with a prop than you can without it. There's certain poses with a chair that I think are way harder with a chair. And it's like, oh, do you really want to be challenged? Do it in a chair. Because it's really hard. You're going to work hard if that's what you want. And I think that if we just give ourselves permission to let props be a lifelong tool, to be used or not used, to be pulled out sometimes or there all the time or any combination, then we are giving ourselves freedom to experience the poses in many different ways, keeping it fresh, keeping it from being boring. Some of the best practices, like just my personal practices that I have, are the ones with like all the props, where I noodle around and I try stuff and I find new ways of being supported or adding challenge. So I call this accessible challenges. This is something that, to go back to the book, it was really important to me to have for every pose that I like have photos for and describe how to do it. There's a part that's like accessible challenges. And what I mean by that is when you are fat or old or injured or disabled or whatever, people think that you don't want to or cannot be challenged. And so they're going to approach you with the like easiest, right? Because that's a whole other thing, but most gentle, most supported version of something, because they think that that's both what you want and what you can handle. And as somebody who's been in a fat body their whole life, sometimes I want to push a little harder. Sometimes I want to, really try to gain some strength or go deeper or whatever. Sometimes you want to sweat, sometimes you don't. Sometimes I'm like, I want to go harder. I want to, challenge myself a little more today. I want to work a little harder. And in a regular class, like they wouldn't give you any options, because in a fat body or a disabled body or an old body, everybody has different stuff going on with their body. And so my way of getting a challenge might look different from, this person over here who's in a thin body or who's super able-bodied or, whatever, doesn't have any injuries. Their way to get a challenge might look like A. My way to get a challenge in the same pose might look like B. But if you don't know to teach somebody, if you don't know that B exists, you can't offer it. And so I talk about accessible challenges. So my way to get a challenge in this pose might not be A, but the accessible challenge for me looks like B. And it might be a totally different thing. And it might include a prop and it might not. But you have to know how to get those challenges. And a lot of times it involves using props to help you to get that challenge, if that makes sense. Sorry if I got a little lost there on the way, but basically, Props are amazing. They're not just for when you can't or those who need them. It's a lot of air quotes today. Props are useful resources and tools for everybody, every age, every ability, every injury history or whatever, every size. Every single person can be helped by using props. And when you stop thinking of them as something to use until you don't need them, they become something that you can have like a lifelong relationship with. And I mean, that sounds like maybe an exaggeration, but I really think like knowing that I am happy to use my props for the rest of my life, it gives me freedom now to continue to play around and find new ways to use them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'll stop my ramble about the props now. There are a lot more of these like lessons and stuff in the book, but that was a lot at one time. And so I'm curious to hear from people, like as you watch this video, whether you're here now or you're watching it in the future, what kind of conceptions or ideas about yoga you might have that maybe you're starting to question, things that you just like believed were true, or like kind of, you know, blanket, just this is what it is, because there's so many of those that we have about yoga today, or you know, as you let all this marinate, maybe after you get the email tomorrow and you're thinking about it more, I'd love to hear. So please feel free to contact me. I love when I get emails and comments and stuff from people like as they're thinking about yoga. I know that sometimes this stuff has to percolate for like a long time. Like these seeds have to get planted. It took me, I don't know, 10, 15, I don't know, 15 years or something to try yoga again. It took over a decade of seeds being planted of like, maybe it could be for me. And it wasn't until I saw, oh, here are these people doing it, and the teacher is not making them feel like garbage, and they are empowered to do it in a way that works for their body, because the pose is the thing that needs to be amended to fit your body. Your body is not the problem. Your body doesn't need to be changed in order to do the pose. It's the pose that needs to bend to change, to work for us. And that's another lesson learned, by the way. That's another reframing of how to think about yoga and how to look at it. So yeah, so thanks for tuning in for this. Please let me know any thoughts or questions that come up about this. I encourage you to think about trying yoga. It doesn't have to be with me. You don't have to buy my book. I don't care. I want you to get the benefits that are available to you because they can change your life. And that sounds like a big statement and I'm tearing up, but it really did change my life and the way that I exist. I'm also, if you don't know me, I cry all the time. I always say like, it's not a live with Laura if I don't end up crying about something. It really can change the way that you exist in your body. And if you're a person who struggles with being kind to yourself or really feeling like comfortable in your body, and it makes you feel like you need to change so that you can feel comfortable, just know that it is possible to be comfortable in your body as it is now. But it does take work because we are constantly inundated with messaging that says that our bodies are wrong and that they're the problem. And so of course we believe that, because if you are told that every day of your life, you're going to believe it, but it's not actually true. And it is possible to change the way that you think and the way that you live and feel and all those things. So yeah, happy to answer any questions or talk to anyone if you want to contact me. Thank you so much for watching this. And yeah, hopefully I will see you around. Bye.